Welcome back. Well, the Prime Minister's Palestinian recognition has been condemned as dangerous, implausible and shallow in substance by my next guest, the Australian's editor-at-large, Paul Kelly, and he joins me now. Paul, thank you so much for your time.
Very good to be with you, Sharri.
Now, you clearly articulate why you think Albanese and others' recognition of a Palestinian state at the United Nations is a terrible move. Why is this?
I've called it a fraud, and the reason for that is the Prime Minister's been very clear, saying that this action is predicated on a series of assumptions relating to the Palestinian Authority, which represent a reversal of everything we've known about the Palestinian Authority for the last couple of decades. So, what is Anthony Albanese saying? He's saying that the Palestinian Authority will take responsibility in Gaza, will take political responsibility in Gaza, that it will hold elections within 12 months, that Hamas will be disarmed, that Hamas will have no future political role at all in Gaza, that a new Palestinian state will be de-militarised, that the Palestinian Authority will reform its education system. It will eliminate the teaching of hatred towards Jews and Israel, that it will cease terrorist payments. Now, when you put all this together, you've got to ask yourself, how credible is this? Now, it might have been possible for Australia and other Western nations to hold out the prospect of recognition of a Palestinian state subject to conditions, subject to some of these conditions being realised. They deliberately decided not to do that. They've offered recognition up front on the assumption that the Palestinians and the Palestinian Authority will honour these commitments, these assumptions. I think that's highly improbable, and that's why I've argued that this is fraudulent.
Indeed, and you know, it's commitments, as you say, so in effect it is unconditional recognition. You write that this move leaves Albanese and Penny Wong exposed as willing fools in a diplomatic fraud. Has this damaged their standing?
Well, we'll see what happens. I think immediately it hasn't damaged their standing because there's a degree of strong support within the centre-right, within the centre-left of Australian politics for what they've done. And of course, when it comes to the international community, they've moved in tandem with other Western democracies. So in that sense, they've got a degree of political protection. The fundamental question is, how will this play out? How will this decision be seen in 6 months, in 12 months, in 18 months? And what I've argued is that Albanese will get entangled in a web of his own making. I think this will lead to a lot of dangerous conditions, a lot of dangerous scenarios.
The biggest deception among the list that you outlined is this sense that Albanese insists Hamas can have no future role in the governing of Gaza. He says that often enough, and yet he opposes Israel's military campaign to remove Hamas in Gaza. He's been arguing for a withdrawal for a very long time now. So the question is, how is Hamas removed?
Well, he says this all the time. He says that Hamas will be removed, that Hamas will be disarmed, it will have no future political role in Gaza. He says that this will lead to a ceasefire. He says this will lead to the release of the hostages. How? None of this is explained. There is no credible pathway offered by the Australian government in terms of sorting out how these objectives are to be realised. This is an expression of hope. And essentially what we see here is, I think we see politicians doing what they've wanted to do for a long period of time.
Exactly.
They've wanted to recognise a Palestinian state. They say that the Palestinian people deserve this, and in many ways I think that's correct. But essentially what they've done is they offer all these justifications for it, which I think are completely untenable.
And the issue is, and I thought this was a very good point in your column, that the Albanese government and others are treating Israel as if it's the obstacle to peace, when in fact, in my strong view anyway, it is not the obstacle to peace. It is Hamas that started the war, could have returned the hostages at any point, and could stop its campaign of terrorism.
Well, a number of years ago, of course, the idea of Palestinian recognition was to come at the end of the peace process. It was supposed to come when the two-state solution was sealed, if you like, as a reward for what the Palestinians had done in terms of their acceptance of Israel's right to exist. Now we've seen a complete reversal, and essentially what's happening is recognition of a Palestinian state is being used as a device, as an instrument to try to intimidate Israel into negotiating. Now, I think, and I've argued...
Netanyahu.
Well, exactly. But one of the points I've argued, I think the key figure here is, in fact, Benjamin Netanyahu, because he won't negotiate with the Palestinians. He's made it absolutely clear that he opposes a two-state solution. He has this vision of a greater Israel. Now, I think this is not in the interests of Israel. It's not in the interests of the Palestinians. And clearly the international community are not going to accept it. So I think there's a fundamental problem here when it comes to the stance that Netanyahu has taken.
I do have, which I've expressed often enough, a different view from you on the Israeli Prime Minister. And I do think there is a long tradition of Israeli Prime Ministers being hated by the international community. And you know, as you know, Golda Meir once said, if we have a choice between being dead and pitied and being alive with a bad image, we'd rather be alive and have the bad image. But of course, I do accept he's controversial internationally and within Israel. But either way, the point is that Israel hasn't been the obstacle to peace, and you can't have recognition when hostages are being held and terrorism is still the main aim of Hamas.
Well, all that's true to a certain extent, but I guess the point I'd make is that in years gone by, various Israeli leaders were committed to a two-state solution, and we had very substantial negotiations presided over by President Clinton, that came to the brink of a peace settlement. At the end of the day, the Palestinians were not in that. They were not prepared to sign up to that.
Arafat walked away.
But essentially, we've had, if you like, the centre of Israeli politics was still committed to a two-state solution. That's over now. And I think that does create really substantial problems for the region and for Israel as well.
I think October 7 changed a lot of that.
Most
Israelis naturally prioritise security.
I think that's right. And I think the great paradox of this situation is the rest of the world is saying we want a two-state solution. But the two-state solution involves Israelis and Palestinians, and support for a two-state solution among both sides at the moment is exceptionally low.
Well, and just to point out, not just on Israel, but of course, many Palestinians, and particularly Hamas, would not only not recognise Israel's right to exist, you know, from the river to the sea and all of that, but the actual doctrine is a genocide. Hamas's doctrine is a genocide of the Jews, something that no one seems to accept. Paul Kelly, such a delight and honour, as always, to have you on the program. Thank you so much.
Great to be with you, Sharri.
Thank you, Paul.